As conflicts explode in Africa, how dangerous are Europe's cutbacks in defense? Those cuts have left European missions underarmed and overstretched. Meanwhile, national governments jealously guard control over their own armies as a matter of sovereignty and the jobs involved in building military hardware. Some rays of hope. European leaders plan a European drone and new satellites. The European Air Transport Command is pooling flights of troops and equipment. But as conflicts persist in Africa and beyond, how many more failed states will it take, and the refugees they cast on European shores before the EU acts more decisively? Hello, I'm Chris Burns, and welcome to The Network, hard talk with a matrix of newsmakers. Wired into this edition, here at the European Parliament in Brussels, Arnaud Danjean, head of the Parliament's Subcommittee on Security and Defence. In Stockholm, Ian Anthony, research coordinator at the Stockholm Peace Institute and director of the Institute's European Security Programme. And in Paris, Jean-Pierre Maulny, deputy director of the Institute for International and Strategic Relations, or IRIS. Let me pitch a question to all of you, starting with Arnaud. Should the EU become more involved to stabilize African countries in crisis? Is the deployment in the Central African Republic by France, led by France, is that enough?
I don't think it should be systematic. It has to be carefully analyzed, but I think, broadly speaking, yes, indeed, I think Europe should be more active in cooperation with African Union, like we do in Somalia, for example, or with some member states more involved, like France in Sahel or Central Africa. But yes, in general terms, yes, I think Europe should be militarily more active.
Okay, Ian, if so, how so?
Well, I think it's a question which requires us to take a step back and look at it in a slightly broader perspective. For the European Union, there is a strong interest in having a prosperous and stable Africa. This is a part of the world which is expected to grow rapidly, economically, where there are great opportunities. And the European Union is trying to develop a comprehensive approach to engagement where the military component is just one element.
Okay. Jean-Pierre, but do you think there is the appetite among Europeans to get more involved?
I think the first thing is that it's a good thing that there is a solidarity within the question of République Centrafricaine, because it was not easy for other countries to come with France. The other thing is that Ian Anthony speak of a comprehensive approach, and it's sure that within République Centrafricaine, military forces is not the only thing.
Okay, but if you look back to a recent EU summit, the leaders there were in disagreement, really, on how much to develop EU defenses. The UK, for instance, says that should be NATO's job. What do you think, Arnaud?
I don't think it's NATO's job. NATO's first job is to protect the European continent with a transatlantic relationship. But when it comes to Africa, I think the first responsibility lays with the European. So I don't think it's NATO's job. And I think EU should be more robust militarily. But of course it has to be combined with a strong, very strong civilian policy, and namely a development policy, of course.
Okay, by the way, we did invite NATO to this program. Ian, what do you think?
It's not really true to say that the European Union spends a little amount on defence. The amount that we spend on the military is broadly commensurate with our role in the world economy. We spend around 16% of total military spending. We account for around 19% of world GDP. The problem is how we spend the money, and the December meeting took useful steps forward in thinking about how we can act in a more coherent way.
Okay, so Jean-Pierre, what do you think, the upshot from that summit? Do you think that really showed that there is determination to advance on this?
In fact, if you take a look to this summit, there is a roadmap which could be useful for the future, and it's also the interest of UK to have better capabilities at any level. It's at the level of the Franco-British cooperation, but it could be also at the European Union level.
Isn't the EU, though, held back in advancing on being more prepared for warfare because there are different government systems? The French and the British are more able to act more quickly, whereas Germany, for instance, is held back by its political system. Arnaud.
Yes, indeed. I think heterogeneity is a key word when you have to look at the European system, so to say, in Europe when it comes to defense and military capabilities, and also decision-making process. It's much faster in France. It takes a long time in other countries with parliamentary scrutiny and processes. It's a problem of political will, but also of decision-making process and of capabilities, and all that is very heterogeneous in Europe.
Okay, well, we did hear from the German defense minister recently that she'd like to see Germany play a larger military role. But, Ian, do you think that the EU is condemned to not acting decisively by itself because of these different political systems?
I don't accept your premise that the EU is not capable of acting decisively. And I think when you use a term like warfare, you take the discussion in the wrong direction. European countries don't expect to face external military threats on their own. They do so in solidarity through NATO. So what we're talking about with the EU is the application of the military instrument as one of a number of instruments that helps to stabilize a country. This is not warfare as we've traditionally thought of it. Okay, well, maybe I'll pitch it a little bit differently. Jean-Pierre, what about, the determination to act as a peacemaker or a peacekeeper?
I think all the countries want to act as a peacemaker or a peacekeeper. The difference is it's a cultural difference between the country with the use of military forces. Even, I think, the decision-making process in Germany, of course, it's longer, but at the end, the question is, do we want to go or don't we want to go?
Okay. What about the question of a rapid reaction force? There's been this talk about battle groups. Arnaud, it seems like it's not really going anywhere. What do you think? Yeah,
it remains virtual. You know, we have been claiming for a better use of these battle groups for a long time now in the European Parliament. But once again, it depends on the member states' will and political will. So you can have the best instrument, and battle groups are good instrument indeed. If you don't want to use them, it's worthless.
Okay, well then, Ian, following up on your previous argument, do you think that maybe it's not the question of battle groups, it should be more a focus on soft power?
We can organize the forces in different ways to achieve the objective. But what we need is a broader discussion about what we're trying to achieve with our military forces in the sort of scenarios that you were talking about in Africa. Once we have agreement on that, the specifics of how we do that can certainly be worked out. Battle groups is one option. It's not the only one.
Okay. Jean-Pierre, what do you think? Battle groups or soft power?
I don't think the question is battle group or soft power. We can have a soft power, and you can have the necessity to have a rapid reaction force. So the principal problem is to have a more modular use of battle groups with countries we can do rapidly a response in case of crisis.
Okay, and how much hope, final question, Arnaud, do you have that EU governments could actually pool their resources and have economies of scale with all the money they spent on defense?
Well, I'm not that optimistic. I think for the time being, and for 2 years now, this slogan of pooling and sharing, it's just words. And you have very few initiatives coming from the member states. So it's a kind of a perspective. Everybody agrees on that, but when it comes to implement that, we have very, very few results. And I'm not so optimistic that we can go very fast on this issue.
Ian, I'll give it to you last. What do you think?
I think in December they took a very useful step by creating a mechanism to check on implementation. For the first time, I think, really, they've created a mechanism where they'll return to this in 18 months and say, we set ourselves objectives, how far have we come in actually achieving them? And this will be done again at the highest political level. I think it was a useful step forward.
Okay, Ian, thank you very much. That's all the time we've got for now. I'd like to thank our guests, Arnaud Danjean, Ian Anthony, and Jean-Pierre Maulny. I'm Chris Burns, and until next time, thanks for connecting with The Network.